Okay.
Okay, here we are. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. I believe we're live. There's a couple technical difficulties, which I believe we have managed to resolve. So hopefully everything's okay and we can proceed here. So without further ado, welcome to our weekly interview and concert series. We're a bit early here. We're going to have, this is the wonderful pianist and composer Bill Anschell with us today, and he's going to be doing a concert with us in December at the Spanish Ballroom, the McMinimans Elks Temple in Tacoma. So, but we're doing the interview early. So, Bill, number one, thank you for joining us. Thank you for your patience and resolving on this stuff. And so glad you could be here with us today.
Thanks, man. Happy to be here. I'm glad we're making it work. That was
yeah. For those of you who don't know, behind the scenes, there's always harrowing stuff putting this together. We actually tested this a couple days ago and it worked wonderfully. We're like, yeah, it'll be great. And then we went to start things up and we're like, there's lots of problems. So, but we're here now and hopefully this works and it's a good experience for you, the listeners here at home. So anyways, Bill, you've been around the Pacific Northwest for quite some time now, making a rather large name for yourself and reputation as a musician and composer and man about town. So for people that don't know you, can you maybe talk a little bit how you started playing music way back in the day?
Sure. The very first way I started playing was just my parents had an upright piano in the basement, and I would hear songs on the radio and figure them out at the piano. I got a book, it was called like 10,000 chord changes or something, so I could figure out when I had sheet music how to play a chord. They weren't jazz voicings or anything like that. This was like, it was like playing Beatles songs and stuff like that off the air. And I had I've had lessons for a brief time on a bunch of different instruments. I don't think piano was first. Clarinet and saxophone were kind of my serious instruments through high school.
Okay.
And so I'm definitely a latecomer. I didn't have my first piano lesson until I was 20. And that was actually with Randy Halberstadt.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was in the middle of, so I went to Oberlin College. I wasn't in the conservatory, but I was taking a lot of classes from the conservatory, including I was in the Oberlin saxophone ensemble playing Barry sax, believe it or not. I took one jazz improv class, but I really didn't know what I was doing. And what I really loved in high school and through college was progressive rock.
Mm-hmm.
I'm only somewhat ashamed to admit I actually still kind of like it. I like going back with fresh ears. But anyway, so my original intention when I took a year off in the middle of college was to become the best progressive rock player I could. But then I started to realize that there wasn't really that much I may take crap for this from some people, but there's not that much to learn about how to play keyboards in a rock band. I didn't feel I felt like there was a ceiling on how much I could learn.
Yeah.
And so even though I didn't like jazz at that time, that was when I decided to take piano lessons. And it started with Randy Halberstadt. And then as soon as I got inside jazz and kind of understood the improviser's mindset and just how much is going on in that music that's amazing, I kind of never looked back. So someday maybe I'll play synth in some rock band or something. But pretty much playing jazz now. After studying with Randy, I studied with Art Landy. And then I went back to college and got a music degree.
Okay. Well, now where did you grow up? I mean, where was home?
I grew up here.
You grew up here. Okay. Yeah. All right. And so for what year were you born? What time period here are we talking?
1959.
1959. Okay. Yeah. So then when you were growing up here, were there any, well, you said you got into jazz in your 20s. So were you, Seattle has had a jazz scene for a long time and a great history of jazz. Were you very much aware of it earlier on or not really?
I was not aware of it at all until like I started those lessons at age 20. Okay. And then I started going here in jazz around town. I must have heard Chuck Deardorff a million times,
Yeah.
And at that point, I was a total beginner, and I just only hoped that I would play with him someday.
Yes. Well, so, okay, when you started noticing jazz around the city and going out and hearing things, what clubs, let's start with that. What clubs were around that you would go frequent and were aware of?
Well, first of all, I was only here for a year at that point, so I didn't hear that much stuff. I can remember going to the Jazz Alley in the University District several times. I think I went to Parnell's while it was called Parnell's.
Okay.
And I remember going to Matzo Mama's, which was I think that was the name of it. It was a restaurant on Capitol Hill where I remember hearing Art Landy play. I went and heard Art a few times. I heard him play. He used to do trio gigs with Gary Peacock, where Art was the pianist and drummer at the same time, and Gary was playing bass.
Yeah, nice.
Because Art had complete hand separation. He has no problem with that stuff.
Okay. Jerome Gray, was he around, or did you know of him? And did you have any experiences with Jerome?
I didn't know of him. I think I'm the only really working pianist of my generation in Seattle that didn't take a lesson with him and get utterly devastated. So maybe I'm lucky I was spared that. I'm sure I would have learned a lot, but people say he didn't make you feel good in the lessons, is my understanding. Did you ever study with him?
No, I wish I had. I would have taken the lumps just to get the education and the knowledge. There's a lot of folks that, I've done several of these interviews, and I always like to ask, particularly the piano players, because I would like to get some of that information. But I have never met him. So hopefully at some point I can get the information via someone else. I talked to Ryan Burns a while ago about this. I said, it'll be cool to get a bunch of piano players together just to talk about Jerome Gray and compile all the info. He said, yeah, he'd hate that. He wouldn't be a fan of that. So
I actually, someone told me he stopped in at a gig I was playing at Tula's. I never met him, but supposedly he liked me, which is unbelievable, because I didn't think that was part of his bag.
Yeah. Maybe. Well, hopefully it would be a shame for all of that information to get lost. I mean, hopefully at some point there'd be a way to just get that information down somewhere. So I don't know.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'd love to see it.
So, but back to you. So you were here for a year, and then where'd you head?
Then I transferred. I had been at Oberlin, and I transferred to Wesleyan University in Connecticut, where I could actually get a music degree. Because at Oberlin, even if you were taking jazz and electronic music like I was, the only way you could get a music degree was to audition playing classical music. And I actually did audition on clarinet, didn't get in. And, piano was out of the question. I didn't even know how to play a scale back then.
Yeah.
So I transferred to Wesleyan. It's a very interesting school. Didn't have anything remotely resembling a conventional jazz program. When I graduated, I didn't necessarily even know what a 251 was.
Yeah.
But I did learn a lot of more esoteric stuff that was interesting. I studied Indian music there, and Bill Barron was Kenny's older brother, was my faculty advisor. And he had kind of his own compositional approach that I was able to learn some things from. But the way university jazz programs are structured now, it's just, Wesleyan was nothing like that. We didn't transcribe stuff. We didn't have play along stuff to work with. It was more just kind of getting theory and trying to, work on it and figure out what you wanted to sound like.
Yeah. I want to jump back really quick because I forgot to ask you. Back when you were in Seattle for that year before you left, my apologies for going back here. Aside from Chuck, who were some other players on the scene that you enjoyed listening to or working with back then?
Well, I didn't work. I did work. I didn't work in jazz. I actually got a really weird gig writing country music and heavy metal music through an ad in the Seattle Weekly.
Okay.
And that was big for me, culminated in a recording project. But as far as jazz that I heard around town, I remember going to hear Randy. I remember hearing Dave Peck. I don't know if I heard Mark Seals, although I'm pretty sure he was on the scene back then. I remember one time I was at the University Jazz Alley, and Denny Goodhue was playing. I can't remember what the trio was behind him, but Julius Hemphill from the Modern Saxophone Quartet stopped by, and he and Denny kind of had a saxophone battle.
Yeah.
And amazing.
Yeah.
And Denny was just killing me. And then I don't know if it was Art Landy or Barney McClure that told me that Denny was as good on piano as he was on saxophone, which is just unreal.
Yeah. I never heard him play. I was very fortunate to have him teach a couple ensembles when I was at Cornish back in the day, and I never heard him play piano, but I heard him, just talking about music and his experiences and things he had to impart. His musical wisdom was very helpful, very helpful.
He was a great player. Still is, I assume.
Yeah. Okay. So back to Connecticut. How many years were you there? Did you finish out a full, was it a bachelor's or a master's, or what were
Yeah,
you
it
doing?
was a bachelor's. So it was just 2 years. I went to Oberlin 2 years, took that year off, went to Wesleyan 2 years, and I had a degree. I think it was music with a concentration in African American music. I think that was
Okay.
what.
All right. The other thing I wanted to ask you too is, after getting together with Randy and starting to get into jazz and going down here in jazz, who were some pianists? We can go with that. We can go other directions too. But who were some pianists that you were kind of into or checked out that you enjoyed?
I've kind of been through everyone, it's hard to single out. Back then, I know I liked Monty Alexander a lot. I liked Ray Bryant a lot. Again, part of the not conventional jazz education at Wesleyan is that nobody introduced me to the family tree of jazz piano. So I was just kind of finding. I did radio in both colleges. I had radio shows, so I heard a lot of, we had access to all those recordings, and I will admit that I bootlegged a few onto cassette. But so I was checking out everyone, and my taste has kind of evolved through the years. I guess I still like all the guys I used to like then, but then more modern players like Herbie Hancock and Brad Meldau kind of speak to me more now than anyone.
Sure. Well, let's talk about your time in Connecticut. So when you're going to school there, are there any of your peers that you studied with or that were around that are still around playing now?
Yeah, I mean, really only one that I'm in touch with. It was a very small jazz program. It was a liberal arts school. It wasn't a music school. But Tierney Sutton was there. She's quite a few years younger than me, but I lingered there for a year or two and wound up playing a lot with her, and we're still great friends. And I just did a gig here with her within the last year. There are other good players that have come through that program. Bill Cunliffe, I don't know if you know that name.
Yeah.
He must have just been 3 years ahead of me or something, so I never met him or knew about him. But there's a few, usually, kind of musical weirdos that come out of there, which I may qualify as.
Well, good to know. So what about the faculty? Who was on the faculty that you got a chance to be around?
Well, my advisor was Bill Barron, and the faculty was just, as far as what I guess were full-time faculty, it was just him and a trombonist who now lives in Boston named Bill Lowe. But Ed Blackwell was the adjunct drum teacher. Okay. And so the drummers I played with, all studied with him. There's one of my best friends from back then wound up being in the band Asleep at the Wheel. You know that band?
No.
For like 30. They're country swing, probably the best known country swing band. Okay. But he studied with Blackwell. There's a woman named Ward Griffiths who lives in Portland now who studied with Blackwell. I know that Andrew Drury, who lives in New York now, studied with him. So Blackwell had a big influence on the drummers there, but there were only two faculty. But I studied Indian music there quite a bit with a guy who in India I think is pretty well known. And if I had it all to do over again, just because the jazz program there wasn't that strong, but the world music program there was, I would have taken African drumming and just gotten the best from that school that I could have, and I'm not sure that I did.
Yeah. Hindsight is 2020, I think, for all of us. We'd all have been invested in Apple and back in the 80s. And anyways. Yeah. All right. Well, what about the scene outside of the college? Were there places to play in town where you could go hear musicians and play and do concerts and sessions and things?
Not very much. I mean, it was in Middletown, Connecticut, which is a very small kind of working class town. Hartford and New Haven were about equal distance from it. The other thing about the faculty ensemble, although I didn't get to study with him, Kenny Barron was the pianist, so I heard him a million times. Yeah. So the faculty, Bill Barron, my advisor, and Kenny Barron and Ed Blackwell. There's a drummer there named Wes Brown. Those are the people I heard the most, but there wasn't a scene in town. I didn't know any, and really, I was just talking about this with Matt Jorgensen actually a couple of days ago. I didn't even know that moving to New York was kind of a rite of passage and a way to get your ass kicked and get a lot better. Like nobody
Yeah.
told me that. And if
Mm.
somebody had, I probably would have moved there right after school, gotten out of it, gotten from it what a lot of really good players have.
Yeah.
But I didn't know. The first thing I did after that, so I made my living actually playing dance classes for a couple of years, and then I got a great gig on a cruise ship. That was my first kind of real world experience.
Okay.
And the cruise ship was actually great. There were 45 musicians on. Some of them were great. Jim Beard was one of the other piano players. Jam sessions, late night. Yeah. It was really where I started to learn about, both about being a jazz musician and about making a living as a musician. That kind of happened there. Yeah.
Where all did you get to travel with the cruise ship?
It was the Caribbean. The regular ports of call. We sailed out of Miami, and we went to St. Thomas, Nassau, and the ship had a private island that we went to. And then we went to St. Croix a couple times. But it was mainly, I did it for it was pretty funny actually, because I as someone whose background was in single note instruments like clarinet and sax, when it came to reading music on piano, I was fine reading my right hand, but if you wrote out both hands, that was just like a foreign language to me. And somehow the ship decided to give me the theater piano slot. So I played this show called Barnum, super hard show actually. And my first month there, I think we were rehearsing the show, and every night I would just go in the dining hall after everybody had left, like at midnight, and just practice that relentlessly. And the only reason I pulled it off, and the first time I pulled it off was actually the first day of the show, was because I memorized it. I could never look at that music and play it. And that's still
I'm assuming that's changed now. Your sight reading abilities with bass clef they're much better now, yes?
Well, I'm a good sight reader of either hand, and I'm a good sight reader of chord changes and rhythms. But if you write out both hands, and if you got that vertical thing going on, I'm really one of my pandemic projects was working on classical music, both because I wanted to study the compositions and because I wanted to get over that shortcoming I have. But it's still hard for me. It's just it's not how I learned to play.
Sure. Well, okay, so you're doing the cruise ship, you're hanging around with a lot of musicians, playing, doing sessions, getting stuff together. What happened after that?
So this is maybe I don't know if it's unfortunate, but it's a detour in my life I wouldn't probably have done if I had it all to do over again. So I'm on the ship. There are all these great players. They can't make a living on land. Some of them are alcoholics. And I kind of look around and think, I need to have a backup career. So the first thing I did after the ship was I went to the University of Wisconsin. I got a master's in arts administration, which is actually kind of a business degree. And I was Richard Davis's TA there, got to know him, and played around Manhattan a lot. It's a small town, but there were gigs. So I was getting that arts administration degree, and then I had a job as a membership and marketing coordinator for the Association of Performing Arts Presenters. And then they moved to Washington. I stayed in Washington, D.C. I stayed in Madison and was just a musician again, which is, of course, what I really like. And then I got a fellowship at the National Endowment for the Arts in their arts administration program. And after that, I got a gig running the regional jazz program for the Southern Arts Federation. And I did that for 3.5 years, but this was Atlanta. So I finally was in a big city with a lot of really good players. And I was doing that day job, and I was working at night, and I was practicing, and I was single. I had no life. And I basically get up at 6 a.m, practice, go to the job, sometimes do a gig at night. And they had late night gigs there. I mean, there were some gigs we went out to breakfast afterwards.
Yeah.
But anyway, eventually, after about 3 years, I was working enough that I could quit that job. I kept a part of it, which was producing a radio show that I created that became pretty widely broadcast around the world. And so I was able to keep doing that sort of as a consultant, but really just be a musician with
Yeah.
most of my, and in fact, you're asked for a year, produced radio, died. But Atlanta, just playing with, I played really, really good players. It was a cool place to be.
All right. Sorry, things are cutting out here a little bit. I caught a little bit of that. Well, most of it, but it's kind of clipping. So speaking of Atlanta, I know you and I talked a little bit about a wonderful trumpet player that many people know about and many people don't, the great Russell Gunn. Did you get a chance to work with him much when you were in Atlanta?
Yeah, for sure. In fact, I'm wondering if he's going to be here with Marcus Miller next month. I know he's been doing that gig.
Yes.
He's incredible. I don't think people realize it, but when you were next to him on the bandstand and you hear the actual sound of the horn, as opposed to hearing him from a distance through a mic, yeah. I don't know. To me, I really like his playing.
Yeah. Well, I do as well. And I'm amazed at you always hear... I'm sorry.
We're glitching.
Yeah. Are you there? Are you with us still?
Oh, yeah. What you just did helped.
I didn't do anything. I can hear you. It's just kind of clipping a little bit here and there.
Okay.
But there we are. So yeah, you were saying we're discussing Russell Gunn a little bit.
Yeah, and I was wondering how you met him.
I first heard him. We were performing. This was with the Pierce College Jazz Band. This would have been in the early '90s, and this was for at the time the IAJE Jazz Festival in Long Beach, California. That was before, of course, they had the whole meltdown and someone funneled off the money, and now they've become JEN. So we'll see what happens with that. But I heard him perform with his ethnomusicology project, and he had, I think, Nicholas Wolf on piano. I can't remember the rest of the band. He had DJ Apollo. But it was amazing. I saw the performance, and it was one of the best things I'd seen in a long time. And I started following his career from then on, and of course, at the same time, there was Roy Hargrove. So it was like Russell Gunn, Roy Hargrove, and those are my two favorite trumpet players at the time. And still, I love both of their playing to this day. But I like the fact that he, much like Roy Hargrove, he could play anything he wanted to play, any style. It wasn't just straight ahead. He could do anything and do it well.
Yeah. There was another trumpet player in Atlanta who nobody knows about, a guy named Eddie Davis. Can you still hear me okay?
Yeah, it's still kind of clipping here and there, but we'll do what we can.
His minor playing. Oh, okay. So there was a great trumpet player there named Eddie Davis who I worked with quite a bit. And he was kind of one of those mystery figures who nobody knew where he lived. He really kept a low profile, but everybody was scared of him as a player. He was incredible. He lives in Virginia somewhere now, but I think even Russell Gunn would probably say, Eddie Davis is as good as it gets.
Yeah.
So that's, I think, with the Crusaders and.
Sorry, that's the amazing thing. There's so many wonderful players all over the world. Some get recognition and some don't. You just go out there and you meet people, and you'll never know. You always find wonderful musicians all over the place. That's kind of the neat thing about it,
Yeah. So Eddie was briefly in the Crusaders, and just by chance, for a while I was writing jazz reviews for the day there. And the first show that I ever reviewed was the Crusaders with him on trumpet. And then I didn't even realize when I met him in Atlanta, it was the same guy. But I've got a ton of bootlegs of me playing with him, and he's just an amazing player.
Yeah. Well, ask him. Maybe you can get it released and you can put it up on the internet for people to hear him. That'd be kind of cool.
Yeah, you know, I think he doesn't want people to hear him. I mean, that's kind of like if he had a single self-promotional bone in his body, people would know who he was. But he prefers to fly under the radar.
Sure. Well, so how many years were you in Georgia now?
I was there for 13 years.
Okay.
So I was,
and then
I was totally established there. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, so after those 13 years, is that when you came out to the Northwest or back to the Northwest?
Yes. And the timing of it was, you know, I got married there. I met my wife there. And we always knew we were going to move back here. But it was hard to move because I was working so much in Atlanta. It was a very fruitful scene there.
Yes.
Easy to make a living player, believe it or not, just playing.
Yes.
I don't know if it's still like that, but it's kind of hard to leave a scene like that. But when my son got old enough to go to school, Atlanta weren't as good, so kind of took that as our cue to move.
Yeah. I remember there's a wonderful saxophonist here. You must know him. His name is Ted Dortch. He used to live in I believe it was Atlanta, and he was talking about the scene and how much work there was as a musician, you know, just to be able to play all the time. Do you know Ted?
I actually don't. You know, a million people have told me about him, and I need to meet him because we have, I'm sure, a million of the same friends, but I haven't met him yet.
Yeah. Anyways, he's lived
Tacoma,
for. Right? Yeah. Well, I think Fred away, but I remember asking him years ago about this scene there, and he was saying, you know, how much there was work. Again, that could be totally different now, particularly after the pandemic. Who knows? I mean, everyone's kind of hurting a little bit, but yeah. I'm assuming that there's still lots of places to play. I mean, we're kind of lucky here in this area in the Northwest between Portland and, you know, Tacoma, Seattle, Olympia, even North Bend, Bellingham, Vancouver, BC. There's lots of support for, you know, the arts and jazz in general and great musicians. But I hear things about other parts of the country where there's just more work. So I don't know.
Yeah. I hear that about Chicago a lot now.
Yeah. Well, so what year did you move back to the Northwest?
2002.
2002?
Yep. Yeah. You're having trouble hearing me, huh?
Well, yeah, there's a lot of glitch and pause, so it's difficult to have that ebb and flow of a conversation, but I'm doing my best. At least I can hear you when there's no echo. Yeah. So we'll do what we can, and if it's a complete mess, we can maybe do a live one again and fix it. So okay. Why did you and your wife, did you both have family here in the Northwest, or?
Kind of. I mean, my family was still my her family was in Boise. So, you know, it's a good, we could drive there if we needed to, or a short flight. So she was much better with her family here than in Atlanta.
Okay. So when
and
you
there's
moved...
Sorry,
go ahead.
Sorry.
You first.
I was done.
Okay. When you moved back here, that would have been, you said 2002. That's right about the time that I was graduating from college. So that would have been, yeah. So when you first moved back, did you get in touch with Randy and folks that you knew from before, or how did you get back into the scene?
Well, I really hardly knew anyone. I had been in touch with John Bishop a little bit. I was thinking about putting out one of my CDs on Origins. So when I moved here, I remember the very first place I went the day after we moved here was the Old Town Ale House, where John was playing with Jeff Johnson and Rich Cole. And those guys wound up being the first people I started working with when I moved here. But I didn't know enough players to have any in. I just started going to as many gigs as I could and sitting in and hoping people would like me. That's kind of all you can do.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
having
yeah,
done
yeah,
that now in 3 different cities, I understand the process for sure.
yeah.
I was
Yes.
I was really lucky that about a year after I moved here, you know, I've been going to the New Orleans and hanging out among other places. And about a year after I moved here, Larry Fuller left, and
Mm,
I inherited the gig with Floyd Standifer, which
yeah.
which was great. I was really lucky to get to know Floyd like that. And actually, when I moved to Atlanta, the pianist Dan Wall, I don't know if you know him, he had
Mm.
just left. So both places, when I moved there were kind of like openings for a piano player that I was lucky to fall into.
Nice. Well, I know now there's a couple different projects that I've seen advertised. I mean, I don't get out, and it's not because I don't want to get out. It's just, you know, with the nature of my schedule with teaching and gigs and family, it's like I don't get out to see stuff. But I see, you know, if it's social media and stuff, ads and things. There's a couple different projects that you've got going on. There's is it the Standards Trio, or what? It's a trio project that you have, and I've seen it advertised for different things. Can you talk a little bit about
Yeah,
that?
sure. Standards Trio, the regular personnel is Jeff Johnson and Devon. Um, we started playing together a long time ago, and we just, I mean, you know, I guess if I have an overriding thing that I care about most as a jazz player, it's spontaneity and action. I have a lot of, and I really, when there's things going on on the bandstand, I can respond to, and when people are responding to what I do, and it makes us play stuff we've never played before, that's kind
Yeah.
of, for me, that's the goal. And
Yeah.
that's what we do in the Standards Trio. We just try to play tunes in a way we've never played them before, and hope that that'll move us in some new directions. And it's about as spontaneous as you can get, which, among other perks, is the fact that you don't have to rehearse. But that's what I've been doing with those guys
So is
probably
there
about
any
10 years now. And we put out a CD about 5 years.
okay, all right. Is there any, I'm assuming, because I know you compose as well. I mean, is there any original content as well, or is it all just standards and come up and catch as catch can and see what happens?
Yeah, it's 100% standard. So I have different groups for the stuff I write.
Gotcha. So then for the stuff that you write, is there another project? I mean, there's the Standards Trio, and then there's another project or group where it's all like original compositions and things of that nature?
Yeah, mostly. I have a quartet, which is with Chris Seimer, Brian Monroney, and Brad Bull. With Brian on guitar, kind of shredding. It's you know, I wouldn't call it fusion, but it's like jazz with a lot of rock elements to it.
Yeah.
And we did a CD called Roller. And we do, I would say, 80% my compositions, 10% my arrangements, and then we also do a song by Chris and a song by Brian.
Yeah. Well,
And
those
then
guys are both composers as well.
yeah. And I have a third group, which is just kind of I was really lucky to get to a bunch of time. Hopefully that's not the end of it, but the last time I went was with Chris Seimer and Jeff Bush. And every time we would go to a country, I would try to arrange some of their traditional tunes, because there's some people that got onto, audiences really like that. So we have some of that in our repertoire, some arranged Peruvian tunes and a Paraguayan tune, and we do a lot of my originals too.
Yeah. Cool. Right on. Well, and there's another project. There's a wonderful saxophone player. I've only heard recordings, but Brent Jensen, you have a group with him as well. Is it a duo, or there's more stuff that you guys do?
Well, we do a lot of different things. I started playing with Brent long before he moved here. He was in Idaho, and we met through the vocalist Jeff Baker. Played on several of his CDs, and then Brent moved here. We recorded a duo CD, which is actually, for both of us, I think, one of our proudest accomplishments. It just came out really well for us. I mean, it was a good representation of what we do, which is very much like what I do with my Standards Trio. We just play tunes. One of us starts playing, the other guy jumps in, and it goes wherever it goes. We've also done a trio record with Chris Seimer.
Okay.
And then we also have a quartet, which hasn't played for a while, but it's called Wellstone Conspiracy. And that's Brent and Jeff Johnson and John Bishop and me.
Okay. All right.
So
are
Brent
all
and I
these on
together.
Origin, or are they self-released on your own label, or how are you putting these out?
It's all on Origin.
All on Origin. Okay. Cool.
Yeah, not the Wellstone Conspiracy. That is not under my name. That's a really collaborative group.
Okay. All right. So in regards to education, teaching, do you teach? There's lots of programs in Seattle in the area that have adjunct faculty and things. Do you do any of that kind of stuff as well, or is any private lessons, or do you not teach?
I have certainly taught in my lifetime. I taught at Georgia State for a while. They have one or two students. It's funny because just yesterday, someone approached me wanting lessons, and what I always tell them is, I'm good at teaching beginners because I don't have a system or anything like that. If somebody who's been playing long enough that they have really specific questions wants to take a lesson with me, that's great, because that's what I can do, is answer questions. But I don't, like Randy has a system, got it laid out, and I think that's what beginners need more than anything.
Yeah.
So I do a little teaching. I don't consider myself a teacher. I can help.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, we're getting close to time here because I'm going to head out to teach. We're starting a little bit later. We've got a lot working against us today, unfortunately, and I'm assuming we'll probably have to do one of these again. We're in the same room where there's no margin for error with Wi-Fi connectivity and sound and the rest of it. So my apologies to you, and thank you for your patience, and my apologies to the listeners. I mean, sometimes, despite our best intentions, we still can't make things work out the way we want, but there's still some good information here, so it's not a complete waste of our time.
Yeah.
So, do you have any other projects or gigs coming up that you'd like to talk about or share with people that are listening here?
Let's see. The only thing I can think of is, I've done a few shows of solo Beatles songs. Just because that's what I grew up playing. And so for me, it's kind of like coming full circle. It feels real good. And I know I have all those tunes in my head, so I can just mess around with them, try to make arrangements on the spot stuff. So I've my solo piano playing has gotten a lot better because I was committed to a lot for 15. How long did I do that? Like 15 years playing in the lobby of an office building where I was lucky that everybody ignored me, so I could actually just work on stuff.
So any concerts coming up with the solo stuff in the near future that people can go check out and hear? Or?
Yeah, let's see. The next one in the book isn't until next September. But when you were asking about projects I'm working on, the big one I'm working on, which I forgot to mention, I've been so I studied electronic music in college at Oberlin. I understood analog electronic theory really well, or as well as you could. So that's always been a point of interest for me. And I've been cranking out these electronica tunes, not like dance music, but just, some people say it sounds more like movie music. But I love electronic sounds, and I like sculpting them, creating them, working with them. So I've actually made 3 CDs worth of that stuff, which I just put online for free. And then KNKX hired me for a podcast series doing that, which was really fun. I would love to do that more. But the project I'm working on right now is I'm basically writing these electronic pieces, and then we're going to go in the studio and replace the piano, bass, and drum parts with live parts where we actually interact with each other like jazz players, and the electronic stuff just becomes textures in the background, kind of.
Very cool.
And I'm almost ready to I can't wait. It's actually the project that means the most to me that I've done, even though I'm not sure anybody's going to want to hear it. But go to the studio. I put out this listening to it, and any that likes it's not, for whatever reason, mass consumption has not embraced it. But anyway,
Yes.
yeah, well, that's nice. I'll probably just release it myself. I mean, if Origin was interested in it and I actually thought that radio stations would play it and critics would review it and all those niceties that you get with being on a label, then I would want to do that. But it's enough different from the kind of jazz you hear on the radio that I'm not sure anybody would play it. So we'll see. But it'll be online if nothing else.
Yeah. Very cool. Before we wrap up, I'm going to ask you, I ask all the guests the same question near the end of the interview, but and normally we open things up for questions too, but we're going to have to we'll do this again and have like actual, great sound quality so we can get all the stuff, documented down here. But in all of your years of playing and studying and being around great musicians, if someone were to come to you and say that they were thinking about being a musician or, wanting to undertake that, what's some advice that you found personally helpful for you and your growth and development that you would impart to them?
Well, that is a great question, but the reality is that the job of the jazz musician has changed so much that what helped me wouldn't help someone else. Because like the best advice I got that helped me make a living as a musician was when I was working on the cruise ship, and the older guys were kind of mentoring me, and they said, if you learn as many tunes as you can and you develop the ability to play in any key, you'll always work. And so that became my focus for a long time. I know just tons of tunes, pretty good at transposing. And as far as working with vocalists go, that was an invaluable skill. But now that there's the iReal book where you don't have to learn tunes because they're right there in front of you. You don't have to be able to transpose because you can just hit the transpose button. It's changed the reality of the kind of advice I would give to someone. And I'm not sure what advice I would give someone. My son is a really good tenor player. And I didn't advise him to become a musician. I didn't really advise him not to. But I think that, CD sales don't exist anymore practically because nobody plays. All musicians know that it hasn't increased in like 30 years or something. And there are fewer and fewer venues, and especially fewer pianos, nice pianos in venues. I mean, I don't like being the doomsayer or anything, but my advice would be, if you don't really love it, if you don't know that this is the thing you want to do beyond a shadow of a doubt, then there are too many musicians and way too few opportunities, I feel like.
Yeah. No, I can definitely agree with that. Your heart has to be in it 100% for sure.
Yeah.
There's a comment, not a question, but a comment.
There's
from
still
one of
ways to make it.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. There's a comment from one of the viewers that they heard you play at the KNKX Holiday Jazz Jam and loved your rendition of Skating. It was lovely. So there you go.
It was hard. That Vince Guaraldi stuff, I didn't realize. So KNKX had me do the Vince Guaraldi Christmas thing. And when you listen to Vince Guaraldi, it doesn't sound like hard music at all. But technically, that tune in particular, I love the fact that they said that, because that tune kicked my ass. And I actually had to cheat. I found a way technically to cheat because I couldn't. The song has these parallel moving thirds that I'm sure if I had classical training and, the right technique, I would be able to do them. But I had to just bounce back and forth between the bass and like covering the melody with two hands because it was the only way I could make it happen. Though much harder music than you might guess.
Yeah.
But anyway, thank you, comment. I appreciate that.
Wonderful. Well, I got to run. My apologies for having to cut this short here. Before we leave, though, if someone wants to check out you and your music, or maybe get in touch about lessons or hire you for performance, where can they go to find more information about that kind of stuff?
It's just anschell.com. My last name is Anschell. Everything is up there. All my music you can listen to for free. And I've also written a lot of stories, which probably have gotten more attention than my music, although I wish it was the other way around. And all the stories are up there too. So that's where I would send people.
Awesome. Well, Bill, thank you so much for your time and your patience, for putting up with all this stuff. Same thing to our listeners. Thanks for your time, for tuning in and joining us, and for your patience with all the stuff we had working against us today. We'll definitely do another one of these in, like I said, in the same room where we won't have the glitching in and out, and get all this stuff sorted. But it's been a pleasure chatting with you,
Okay.
and we look forward to playing some music with you the first Sunday in December at the Spanish Ballroom of the McMenamins Elks Temple here in Tacoma. And yeah, thank you so much. Been a pleasure.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm looking forward to the glitch-free interview. It'll be good.
Me too. Me too. All right. Take care.
Great.
We'll talk to you later.